There are 3 really important days for Christians, and you'd be forgiven if you could only name 2 of them, and even if you got one of those wrong. Despite all that we think about our history, the church hasn't been very good at keeping on task. We pretty well go wherever we want. Hi, I'm Drew, and this is Faith 15. Now, the earliest Christians were celebrating the resurrection of Jesus since the day it happened, right? And then Jesus kept showing up unannounced. We have those strange, different gospel stories. So the holy day we know as Easter is the oldest, most obvious celebration in the life of the church. But fewer than 200 years later, Christians all over the known world were celebrating 3 days as the most important. Easter, obviously, and no, not Christmas. That wouldn't show up for another 400 years, officially. The Epiphany and the Pentecost formed a trinity with Easter as the big feasts of the church for several centuries. And for me, the character of these 3 is both provocative and exciting. Now, the Epiphany was originally centered on the baptism of Jesus, though it has since added to it the visit by the wise men and the wedding at Cana, as forming its own Trinitarian origin story. But if we center on this one aspect of that, the baptism, the rebirth of Jesus with the Holy Spirit, and pair that with the resurrection of Jesus, we can see a spiritual dance beginning to form, a dance of humanity with the divine through this Holy Spirit, lifting our hands and feet to the beat. Now, the Spirit forms the human Christ in Jesus and returns him, rebirthing him into the world again. And then after he ascends, the Spirit comes a 3rd time to find surprisingly willing dance partners in the disciples. These 3 principal feasts tell a story of this great human and divine dance, a dance of hope and incredible grace in the Holy Spirit. So Pentecost is the realizing of the Spirit to all of humanity, not just the Christ. All of this speaks to the big why of Pentecost, that the Holy Spirit comes to make the divine presence of God known everywhere. But it doesn't speak to the other half of the story. Jesus submits to be baptized by John in the Jordan, as he also submits to death on the cross. The very nature of being human is both full of grace and a perpetual invitation to sacrifice. Perhaps this is why you can hardly read a passage about discipleship in which Jesus doesn't talk about sacrifice, about giving up one's possessions, sharing from abundance, or taking up one's cross. For Jesus, the intention of living a kingdom life in the grace of God begins with personal sacrifice. An idea that is both revolting and frightening to most American Christians. And because we don't really like the idea, we twist it and critique it. Jesus doesn't really want a barrier between us and God, right? So self-sacrifice is kind of like an entrance fee. That seems pretty bad for a good God. Or, we might say, how can Jesus be a path for all of us while arguing the rich should be left out? I mean, that sounds pretty hypocritical, Jesus. Of course, while these are legally reasonable questions, they also kind of avoid the central issue. Jesus doesn't mandate a sacrifice like a fee. He invites people to free themselves from the burden of possession. No, nor is he saying wealthy people are bad people, but that money gets in our way and encourages selfishness and greed. At its root, the personal cost of following Jesus isn't about money, but pride. The selfish desire to be right and secure and dependable. So Pentecost is the fulfillment of that moment when the disciples finally shed their desire for Jesus to be with them forever. When they gave up their sense of personal conviction and entered into a kind of public communal spirit of joyful presence with others. In this way, all of this speaking in other languages and sharing and communing with the world in a profound moment of extraordinary clarity, a public epiphany, or for the theologically minded, a public apocalypse, that didn't serve to benefit anyone or a cause or a personal pride of place. It was the most selfless moment of the disciples' lives. And through their selflessness, the kingdom came ever closer. Keep loving, and we'll see you next time.